The sky over Dustwater was the kind of pale gray that pressed down on the chest like grief. The wind carried a bitterness, whispering of storms not yet arrived. When the stagecoach wheels groaned over the gravel path and halted before the old mercantile, no one stepped forward to greet it. The townsfolk remained still, peering through windows and from behind barrels, as if waiting to see if the old tale would walk out again in a new dress. Josephine Lane stepped down in morning black, her hands gloved, her posture straight. A parasol hung uselessly from her wrist, the lace frayed at its edges. Her face was veiled, but the slope of her shoulders betrayed no fear, only exhaustion, the kind that seeps from bones weathered by too much silence. Children gawked. Mothers tugged them close. Somewhere a horse stomped and whinnied, as if it too could smell the stories trailing behind her. The coachman didn't help her with her trunk. He muttered something about not tempting God's patience, and drove off before she could ask where the boarding house stood. Josephine stood alone, boots slowly soaking through in the growing puddle beneath her. She adjusted the veil. Waited. The man who had sent for her, Earl Rollins, emerged from the saloon, his boots sharp and hat crooked just so. Broad-shouldered and red-faced from whiskey, he looked her up and down like a butcher surveying meat gone gray. His lips twisted in disgust before he spoke a word. "You didn't say you were that old." Josephine said nothing. Her silence had weight and she knew it. She held his gaze beneath the veil. "You didn't say you were her." Josephine Lane. The Black Widow of Bisbee. The one they say cursed 2 husbands into coffins. The townsfolk crept closer now, drawn by the scent of scandal like buzzards circling a dying calf. Whispers rustled like dry leaves. "She's the one whose husband died a week after their vows, and the second before the ink on the license dried." She still said nothing, but her chin lifted just slightly. Earl shook his head, took a step back. "I don't need your death sticking to me. I got a ranch to run, land to hold. Go back where you came from. I sold everything to come here. You ought not to be done that." And with that, he spat into the dirt, turned his back and walked away, his boots thudding like nails into the lid of a coffin. The onlookers did not cheer or intervene. They simply drifted off one by one, as though the show was over and the ghost had been left to wander. The rain began. It came in hesitant drops, then a steady patter that darkened the shoulders of her coat and turned the road into a slick ribbon of mud. Her trunk was still on the ground. She dragged it herself step by step, leaving behind 2 trails of iron-edged sorrow that the rain could not quite wash away. By the time she reached the edge of town, the sky had gone black as tar, and thunder growled like something ancient had stirred. The sheriff met her by the livery, not unkind but cautious. Sheriff Dalton was a man of worn patience, silver threading through his mustache and boots that looked too tight. "Mississippi Lane," he greeted. She nodded. "I can't rightly send you back in this storm. And I reckon you've been paid for. There's an old cabin out by Miller's Pines. No one's claimed it since old Clem died in it. You'll find it's dry enough, though the roof leaks when it rains straight down." "Thank you," she murmured. He hesitated before handing her the key. "You believe it?" "Believe what?" "That you bring misfortune. That maybe you've been marked." Josephine looked past him into the storm. "No more than anyone who's buried what they love." He watched her walk away, the key tight in her hand, her coat flaring like a crow's wing in the wind. The cabin was worse than described. The windows were clouded with grime. Something had nested in the hearth. The door groaned like it remembered pain. Inside, dust claimed every surface. A broken chair slumped in the corner like it had given up waiting for someone to fix it. But there was a table and a stove and 4 strong walls, and she had lived in worse. She lit a lantern with a practiced hand and took off her coat. Underneath, she wore the last good dress she owned, black, lined with old lace, the waist taken in to fit her dwindling frame. Her reflection in the soot-dark window startled her. The face looking back was not cursed. It was simply tired. The eyes had known too many goodbyes. The mouth had forgotten what laughter felt like on its edges. But there was still strength there, a flicker of something that had not died with the men she had buried. She sat down, took a breath, and heard a noise outside. The creak of a branch? No, a footstep. Slow, purposeful. Her hand drifted toward the carving knife still sheathed in her trunk. She stood and moved toward the door, each board groaning beneath her step. Another footstep. She threw open the door, and saw nothing. Nothing but trees, their arms outstretched, the wind hissing between them like breath through clenched teeth. Then, movement. Just at the edge of the woods. A man. Bare-chested despite the rain. A bare pelt draped over his shoulders. He stood still as if waiting. She blinked and he was gone. She shut the door, bolted it. Her heart thudded in her throat. She told herself she'd imagined it. Grief made ghosts and loneliness gave them shape. That night she sat at the table and wrote in a small, battered book. They left me again. But I am not gone. I have breath. I have fire. And somewhere out there, someone watched me without flinching. That, at least, means something. The next morning, the storm had passed. The town pretended she didn't exist. No one came to check on her. No one asked if she had food or fire. But when she stepped onto her creaking porch, she found a bundle of kindling tied with rough twine. Beside it, a single feather, carved from pine, smooth as if sanded with care. Josephine picked it up, turned it in her hand, and for the first time in days she smiled. Not because she felt hope, but because someone had seen her and hadn't turned away. Josephine carried the carved feather inside, running her thumb along its smooth curve. Someone had taken time to whittle it, sand it, shape it. In a world where folks whispered her name like a plague, that small gift felt louder than a sermon. By afternoon, she had chopped enough firewood to line the walls. Her hands blistered, her spine stiff from years without labor. Yet it wasn't just survival that urged her forward. It was the feather, the kindling, the sense that someone was watching, not to judge but to help. That night, she left a biscuit wrapped in cloth on the edge of the trees. She didn't know why. She only knew it felt right. At dawn, the cloth was gone. In its place, a rabbit pelt lay folded with careful hands. Josephine stood barefoot in the dewy grass, the pelt in her hands. She whispered, "Thank you," into the trees, then turned back toward her cabin, heart beating fast and quiet. The next few days followed a rhythm. She would work, mend the door latch, clean the chimney, sweep out the mice. And each morning she would find a token left on her porch, a length of fishing line, a carved spoon, dried berries wrapped in leather. She never saw the giver, only the signs of his care. One afternoon she followed his tracks. They led north, deep into the pines, each step placed carefully on the forest bed. She moved softly, cradling her breath, her skirts snagging on low limbs. She should have turned back. But something in her, something old and defiant, wanted to see. The tracks ended at a clearing ringed by cedar. In the middle stood a rough-built cabin, smoke curling from a stone chimney. A lean-to held stacked firewood and smoked meat. There was no dog, no sign of welcome. Just stillness, like the forest held its breath. She took one step closer and a voice called out, "Careful where you tread, ma'am. Some ground don't like strangers." Josephine turned slowly. A man stepped from the shadows between two trees. He moved without sound, tall and broad-shouldered, with a rifle cradled in one arm like it was born to him. His face was weather-lined, half-shrouded by a beaded neck scarf, and his dark hair fell to his shoulders in uncut waves. He didn't smile. But his eyes, almond-shaped and quiet, held no threat. "You left the feather," she said. He nodded once. "You looked like someone who needed it." "I've never been carved for before," she said softly. He tilted his head. "Never met someone who needed proof they were still real." They stood there, the hush of pine needles beneath them, wind threading through the branches above. "I'm Josephine Lane," she offered. "I know." His voice was low even. "Name travels faster than wagons in a town that's small." Her breath caught, expecting mockery. But none came. "And you?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "Thomas Gray." She waited. He added no titles. No explanation. "Why help me?" she asked finally. Thomas looked past her toward the distant peaks. "Because no one else will." He turned and walked toward his cabin. For a moment she thought he would leave her standing. But then he paused and without looking back said, "If you're staying, best not to step in the trap circle." She followed, curious despite herself. Inside, his cabin was warm and sparse. A clay pot steamed on the stove. Deer pelts hung to dry. Wooden carvings lined the mantel. Birds, horses, wolves, each etched with reverence. "I didn't expect," she began, "that I'd have a roof, that you'd have kindness." Thomas poured 2 tin cups of broth and handed her one. "You'd be surprised what survives out here. Even things people call cursed." She sipped. Salt and marrow. It tasted of earth and healing. "I was married," she said. "Twice." "I know. They died." "I know. They say I killed them." He met her eyes, calm. "Did you?" "No," she whispered. "Then it don't matter what they say." Josephine felt something shift inside her. Not trust. Not yet. But the first brick in a wall that might someday hold weight. She returned to her cabin that night, the pelt he gave her wrapped around her shoulders. That warmth lingered long after the fire dimmed. The next few weeks passed in quiet companionship. Thomas came by during dawn or dusk, always wordless at first, offering supplies or tools. She would hand him bread or dried apples. No one in town saw them speak. The woods kept their secrets well. Once he helped her mend the chimney roof. They worked in rhythm, her passing nails, him setting them firm. Rain rolled in as they worked and she slipped. He caught her before she hit the ground. Their faces were close, breath mingling. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes." Her voice shook. "Just not used to being caught." "I don't drop things easy," he replied. Later, by the fire, he showed her how to string snares. She watched his hands more than the wire. "You were raised Comanche?" she asked. He nodded. "My mother's people. My father was a white trader. Didn't stay long. Mine was a preacher. He stayed too long." Thomas chuckled. It was low and rare and warm. "You laugh," she said, surprised. "Not often." "You should." Your eyes soften. He didn't answer, but the corners of his mouth tugged upward for a moment before he stood to stoke the fire. They rarely spoke of the town, but both knew the air had changed. Folks had begun to notice Josephine looked healthier. Her dresses cleaner. Her boots shined. Some said the curse had moved into the woods. Others whispered it was infecting the pines. One evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, Thomas sat on her porch rail, whittling. "You ever think of leaving?" he asked. She blinked. "Where would I go?" "Somewhere no one knows your name." "My name is all I have left." He nodded slowly. "It's a good one. Sounds like thunder before a storm." A beat passed. "You ever been in love, Thomas?" "Once." "What happened?" "She chose someone the town approved of." "Did he love her?" "No. But he had a name that didn't make folks cross the street." Josephine's throat tightened. "You?" he asked. "I love them both. But only one knew it before he died." Thomas looked at her then. "Not through her. Not past her. At her." "Then you love different than most." They fell into silence. The wind shifted. The air turned colder. Down the trail a figure approached, broad, swaying. Drunk. Earl Rollins. He stumbled toward the cabin, slurring her name. "Joe. Sepine. You in there, you snake-eyed devil? You made me lose everything." Thomas was on his feet before she could stand. "Stay here." Earl came closer, pistol in hand. "They said you'd be my luck. That accursed woman burns off the past. But you brought ruin. You hexed me." Josephine stepped outside. "I warned you I came with loss. You tricked me. I told the truth. You didn't listen." Earl raised the gun. But before he could aim, he slipped on the muddy path, his boots flying. The pistol fired harmlessly into the air as he landed face first in the trough. Thomas cocked his head. "He always fall that gracefully?" Josephine exhaled, chest tight from fear and fury. "I suppose even curses get tired of him." Thomas tied Earl's hands and left him at the sheriff's porch with a note. Later, warming themselves by firelight, Thomas held something in his hand, a piece of leather. Branded into it was a mark, a ring of flames surrounding an eye. Josephine frowned. "What is it?" "Trouble," he murmured. "This mark belongs to the Riders of Cleansing Flame." "Who?" "A group that hunts what they call unclean. Witches. Heathens. People like me. And now, maybe people like you." She paled. "They ride at night. Always leave a mark first. Then they burn what they find." Josephine looked to her walls, her roof, her tiny piece of peace. "Why me?" "Because you remind them they're wrong. And scared men burn what they can't name." Silence stretched. Then she said, "You don't seem scared." "I've lived too long with fire at my heels." She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. "Then maybe we stand together." He turned his palm upward, interlaced her fingers with his. The wind outside howled. Inside, their silence was its own answer. The rain came before dawn, not a whisper this time, but a downpour like grief-given voice. It hammered the roof in a steady drumbeat, seeped through the cracks in the shutters, and turned the earth outside Josephine's cabin into a swamp of roots and regret. She stood at the window, wrapped in a wool shawl Thomas had left by her hearth 2 days before. Her breath fogged the glass. The pines danced in the storm. And somewhere in the shadows beyond them, danger was gathering. Earl Rollins hadn't come back for his pistol. That alone would have been enough to worry her. But it was the symbol, the ring of fire and watching eye, that haunted her more than his slurred threats. Thomas had said it plain, the cleansing riders were near. And if they thought she was a curse, a witch or a stain on their God-fearing land, they'd come with fire. She lit the lantern just as the knock came. One beat. Two. Then a pause. She unbolted the door slowly, heart already rising into her throat. Thomas stood soaked in the rain, shoulders tense beneath his oilskin coat. Water streamed from his hair, and behind him, a mule trailed a wooden sledge stacked with bundled food and tools. "I'm staying," he said without preamble. She stepped aside to let him in, saying nothing, just drinking in the fact of him, tall, alive here. "They lit signal fires last night. 3, he added, shrugging off his coat. "That means they ride at moonrise." "For me?" she asked. "For anyone they want to make an example of." "Me? Anyone who don't fit in their world of straight lines and clean names." She stirred the fire to life. The flames hissed against the cold. "What do? We get ready." The day passed in work and silence. Thomas boarded the windows with scavenged planks. Josephine packed bags, flour, salt, medicine. She filled canteens. Sharpened a knife. Laid out the pistol Earl had dropped, freshly cleaned. At one point she paused and looked around her cabin. The warped table. The single chair. The old teapot that had cracked from heat last winter. She had hated this place at first. Now the thought of leaving it behind scraped at her chest like a stone. She found Thomas outside stacking damp brush away from the wall. "You ever had a home?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Once. Before they burned it. Do you think it's worth fighting for?" "This," she gestured at the cabin. "This shell. This world." He turned then. His face was unreadable. Not the walls. The person inside them. They shared no meal that evening. Just coffee and silence. When darkness came, it came fast. A single torch appeared on the ridge. Then another. And another. Until the treeline glowed like the edge of hell. Josephine watched from the slit between boards. Men on horseback moved like shadows stitched to fire. Their leader wore a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat lined with red. His horse was pale, ghost-colored. His voice carried, rough and righteous. "Bring out the witch," he shouted, "or we'll cleanse her from this land ourselves." Thomas stepped beside her. "They won't wait." She nodded. Her hands didn't shake. "Not yet." "What if they burn it down?" she asked. "They will." "What if we run?" "They'll follow." So we make it cost them." He handed her a rifle. She took it without question. They waited. The first shot cracked through the air like a slap. Thomas returned fire. A man screamed in the dark. The riders fanned out, torches flicking, guns raised. A window shattered. Lead tore through the wall, sending wood splinters flying. Josephine crouched by the door, rifle braced. A man kicked in the half-broken shutter and tried to climb through. She fired. His body slumped forward, stuck between the frame. Her breath caught. It was her first kill. She didn't feel guilt. She felt survival. Outside, hooves thundered. One of the torches hit the roof. Flames curled through the shingles, bright and fast. "Roof's gone," Thomas called. "We go out the back." He kicked down the rear wall with 3 hard blows. Smoke poured into the room. The fire was climbing now, ravenous and shrieking. Josephine covered her mouth with her shawl, grabbing the bag she'd packed. Thomas pulled her through the gap, and they stumbled into the forest as the cabin roared behind them. Gunshots cracked. Trees exploded with bark as bullets chased them. But the rain had returned, soaking the brush, dousing the lower flames. The riders gave chase, but the pines favored those who knew their paths. Thomas led her through game trails and river bends. Once, they ducked behind a fallen log as hooves passed within arm's reach. Josephine pressed her back against bark slick with moss, trying not to sob, not to scream. Thomas reached out, laid a hand on her knee, steadying. She met his eyes and nodded once. She could do this. She was doing this. They waited. And waited. Then silence. Only the whisper of wind and the drip of rain. They moved again, slower now. Her legs ached. Her lungs burned. A root snagged her hem and she almost fell. Thomas caught her again. "You always catch me," she said. "Only when you need it." They reached his cabin just before dawn. It sat untouched, silent, waiting like an old friend who'd known they'd return. Inside, he set down his gear and finally allowed himself to slump against the wall. Josephine stood in the middle of the room, shaking from cold and rage. "They took everything," she said. "Even the things I had only just begun to love." Thomas looked at her. "Not everything." She turned toward him. "You're still here," he said. "So am I." She crossed to him. Sank to her knees. "We can't go back," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "They'll hunt again." "Yes." "Then what do we do?" He didn't answer with words. He reached behind a rafter and pulled down a wooden box. Inside, silver coins, maps, letters. A rifle older than hers. A tin star dulled by years. "My father was a scout," he said. "For the army. He left when I was born, but he taught my mother things." I listened. "What? We're not helpless." "What are we?" she asked. He met her gaze. "We're dangerous." That night they made plans. She wrote down names of those who had threatened her. Marked trails. Paths, safe houses from his time riding the high ridges. The fire had taken her home. But not her name. They were still coming. So she would be ready. The sun had not yet risen, but the forest was already awake, wet with mist, humming with tension, holding its breath like the world knew what was coming. Josephine crouched near the base of a boulder, rifle in her arms, eyes scanning the treeline. Her dress was torn at the hem, boots caked in mud, hair damp and coiled at her nape like a storm waiting to break. Behind her, Thomas stood silent, adjusting the sights on his musket, every motion slow, deliberate, calm. He had the look of a man who'd already survived too many last stands. "They'll come at first light," he said. She nodded. "That's when cowards feel like kings." The plan was simple. Lure them into the ravine. The rain had softened the earth. One wrong step, and a man on horseback could vanish into the clay without a scream. She'd scattered broken glass and deer scent along the slope to confuse the trail. Thomas had placed traps, buried steel jaws and hidden snares, and every branch above them had been chosen for cover, not poetry. Still, she felt something tremble in her ribs. Not fear. Resolve maybe. Or memory. She looked down at her hands. Not long ago they had shaken just holding a teacup. Now they gripped iron and powder. A hawk cried in the distance. The morning light cracked open the sky. And then, hooves. Fast. Furious. Dozens. The riders came like judgment itself. Torches lit, rifles drawn, their red-coated leader at the front, standing high in the stirrups. His voice cut through the trees like a saw. "Josephine Lane. Thomas Gray. You've had your warnings. Come out and we'll make it swift." Thomas didn't move. Neither did she. I said. The first trap snapped. A scream. A rider went down. Panic scattered through the group like embers in wind. Then the first shot. Josephine fired from the boulder's shadow. A rider toppled backward off his horse, torch rolling into the ferns. Flames caught on the oil-soaked pine needles just as planned. The forest lit up in sheets of orange. More gunfire cracked. Men shouted. Horses reared. Another trap sprang, flinging a rider into the dirt with a sickening thud. Still they came, stubborn, blind with zeal. Thomas stood tall on the ridge, musket raised. He fired once, reloaded smoothly, then again. Each shot was chosen. Not to kill, always to send a message. Josephine ducked behind a tree, reloading, breath ragged. A bullet splintered bark inches from her face. She didn't flinch. She rolled, fired low, and hit the leg of a horse mid-charge. The beast shrieked and collapsed, sending its rider into the mud. Another trap claimed him. Chaos danced. Through smoke and fire, the red-coated leader dismounted. He walked forward like he owned the storm, firelight flickering across his gritted teeth in righteous fury. "You're vermin," he bellowed. "Godless, cursed filth." Thomas stepped from the shadows, face streaked with ash. Funny thing about fire, it don't always burn who you want it to. The man raised his revolver. And Josephine stepped between them. She didn't shout. Didn't plead. She stood calm, poised like a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. "If I'm cursed," she said, voice even, "then let the curse end here." He laughed. "You'll swing for what you are." She cocked her rifle. "You mistake surviving for sin." He fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the gorge like a church bell. Josephine didn't fall. Thomas had moved faster. He'd slammed his shoulder into her, spinning her away from the line of fire. He took the bullet. It hit low just above the hip. He staggered but didn't drop. Blood bloomed through his shirt like red spilled across the snow. Josephine screamed, but not in fear. In fury. In heartbreak. She rose, sighted down her barrel, and fired once. The leader fell. No final sermon. Just silence. The others fled, riders without cause now, their fear heavier than their faith. Josephine ran to Thomas as the flames died and smoke curled toward heaven. He was on his knees, one hand pressed to the wound, eyes fluttering. She held his face in her hands, dirt and sweat on her palms, tears tracking through the soot on her cheeks. "Stay," she whispered. "You have to stay." He gritted his teeth. "It's not deep. Just fire on the surface." She laughed through her sob. You always pretend to be fine. I told you. I don't drop what I hold. They sat there as the fire quieted. As dawn fully broke and light touched the ash-strewn trees. Later she stitched him with her own hands. Cleaned the blood. Wrapped the wound. The lines between them were no longer drawn in uncertainty. She had bled for him. He had shielded her. In town there were rumors. They said the riders were beaten back by lightning. That the cursed widow summoned a beast from the woods. That the Comanche ghost sons had returned for vengeance. But no one dared say it to her face when she came into town, standing tall, rifle slung over her shoulder, Thomas at her side, a carved feather pinned to her dress. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. They rebuilt the cabin, together this time. Stronger. Higher. A porch wide enough for 2 chairs and silence shared in golden hours. He planted wildflowers along the path. She hung her veil by the door like a retired weapon. On one of the first nights of peace, Thomas leaned close to her as they sat by the fire. You're not cursed, he said. You're the reason the fire ended. She didn't answer. Just kissed his temple, closed her eyes, and listened to the forest breathing around them. Sometimes storms bring ruin. Sometimes they bring rebirth. Josephine Lane had lived through both, and chosen what came next. The wind didn't howl, it whispered, dragging dust like silk across a hollow wedding ground. Torn lace hung from bent poles. The white ribbons had turned gray with soil. A broken horseshoe lay at the foot of a collapsed altar, its promise of luck long forgotten. 3 women stood alone beneath a sun too cruel for mercy, in dresses stitched with dreams and now soaked with sweat, sorrow, and shame. Mary clutched her bouquet tighter than she meant to. The wildflowers had wilted hours ago. Her fingers were red from the thorns, but she didn't seem to notice. She stared at the horizon, hoping the figure that galloped away would ride back. He wouldn't. He had said her face looked sweeter in her letters than it did in person. Said she took up more wagon space than expected. Then he spat, tipped his hat to no one, and rode into the dust. She hadn't spoken since. Jo sat on a barrel, legs wide, dress torn at the hem. Her bonnet had blown off minutes earlier, but she made no move to retrieve it. Her dark hair clung to her temples in wet strands. She had saddled her own horse, cooked for her own ride here, and paid for the boots on her feet. She was a woman of sinew and muscle, built from wood chopping and fence fixing, not ribbons and needlepoint. Her groom had taken one look, sneered, and said, "Ain't no man gonna wed a woman who could wrestle cattle." She chuckled once, low and bitter, and let him go. But now her jaw was clenched so tight her teeth ached. Ellen paced, fuming. She muttered under her breath, words clipped and vicious. Fat? Fat. Oh, I'll show him fat when I shove this cake down his lying throat. She kicked a metal tin across the dirt, which clanged into a post and scared a pair of prairie dogs into scurrying away. Her bodice was strained but stylish, her dark curls pinned back with yellow ribbon. Her letters had promised laughter, clever jokes, a woman who could charm a tavern into silence. She hadn't expected her husband to turn red-faced at the train station, blink at her waist, and say loud enough for everyone to hear, "You didn't say you were like this." The 3 of them hadn't known each other before that morning. Now they were sisters, bound by insult. The townsfolk had watched, of course. Some hid behind curtains. Others whispered by the saloon doors. One woman had the gall to laugh, loud and braying like a mule, until Joe's glare sent her scuttling. No one offered a ride. No one offered water. Just stares and silence. By noon the heat turned cruel. Their dresses, picked with care months ago, were now stained at the hem, sagging at the sleeves. Mary sat in the shade of a broken cart, face pale and damp. Ellen fanned her. Joe offered water from a dented canteen, her eyes never leaving the trail. "I've got 4 silver coins and a knife," Ellen muttered. "Reckon we could trade for a wagon and head east." "East to what?" Joe asked flatly. "More of the same?" Mary stirred. Her voice was a whisper wrapped in shame. "Maybe we deserve it." "No," Joe said, sharper than she meant. "No, we don't." They lapsed into silence. Dust swirled lazily. Somewhere a hawk cried overhead. Then the rattle came. Wagon wheels. Slow. Uneven. Not the high-sprung ride of a settler seeking land, but something else. A single mule pulled the rig, its sides sweating, head bowed. The wagon was patched with old wood, a rusted lantern swinging from its front beam. The man who stepped down wasn't young. His beard was gray-flecked, hands calloused. He wore no badge, no preacher's collar. His boots were scuffed, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. A nail poked from the side of his belt. He carried no gun. He looked at them one by one, First Ellen with her fire, then Mary with her wilt, then Joe with her clenched fists, and he didn't flinch. "Looks like somebody forgot their manners," he said, voice low and smooth. "Leaving women like you in the dirt." Ellen snorted. "You here to mock us too, mister?" "No, ma'am," he said. "I'm here to build a roof." Mary blinked up at him, uncertain. "A roof?" He nodded toward the empty trail. "My cabin's got 3 rooms and enough stew for 4. You're welcome if you'd rather sleep under something besides stars and judgment." "Why?" Joe asked, stepping forward. "You don't know us." "No," he said softly. "But I know what it is to be left behind." He didn't wait for permission. Just started walking toward the wagon, opened the back and pulled out a folded blanket. Set it gently on the ground, like he was preparing a bed for royalty. The women exchanged glances. No words, just slow, tired nods. They climbed aboard. The ride was quiet. No questions asked. The road curled through dry brush and past wind-gnarled trees. Occasionally the man whistled, off-key and gentle, like he was trying to soothe the mule or maybe himself. Mary asked his name when the sun began to drop. He tipped his hat and said, "Luther." "Luther what?" "Just Luther." Ellen smirked. "Mysterious. Practical. Are you gonna kill us?" she asked lightly. "No," he replied, unshaken. "That'd be wasteful." She grinned despite herself. The cabin was nestled near a bend in the creek, hidden by tall pine and low hills. Smoke curled from its chimney. The porch sagged a little, but lanterns glowed in the windows and chickens pecked lazily in the yard. He helped each woman down like she was glass, not because he thought them weak but because he thought the world had already been too rough. Inside smelled of cedar and rosemary. Bread rested on a cloth. The table was wide, handmade. The chairs were mismatched but sturdy. "Sit. Then sleep. Questions can come tomorrow." Mary wept when she tasted the bread. Ellen kissed his cheek. Joe sat at the far end and watched him as he stirred stew with hands scarred by years. Later, by lantern light, Mary lay under a quilt and whispered to Joe across the room. He didn't flinch. Joe nodded. Didn't look away neither. Ellen's voice came from the other room. "That man ain't just strange. He's good." Joe whispered back, almost to herself, "Or broken. Like us." Outside the stars blinked awake. Inside the cabin breathed steady. "Safe. Real." And while the women slept, their wedding dresses folded in the corner, the man named Luther sat on the porch. He carved something small from wood, a circle. Then another. Then a third. When dawn came he set them on the table. 3 rings, not of gold but of maple. Not polished but shaped by hand. For now he didn't say a word. But something had started. Not a romance, not yet. Not a future. Not yet. But a shelter. A stillness. A place where 3 women had once been tossed aside. And were now, for the first time in their lives, simply welcome. The morning sun filtered through thin curtains, touching the wood-paneled room with gold. Mary stirred first, her fingers grazing the rough wool blanket, the faint scent of cedar and flowers still clinging to the air. She blinked at the soft light, then at the carved wooden ring on the table beside her cot. She didn't touch it. Not yet. In the next room, Ellen was already awake, crouched near the stove with a ladle in one hand and a critical eye on the pot. She muttered under her breath about salt ratios and flavor, tasting, adjusting. The kitchen was modest, handmade shelves, mismatched plates, a few tin cups, but there was warmth in its order. She didn't know why she was trying so hard. Only that it felt right. Joe stood outside, arms crossed, staring at the hills. Her breath steamed in the crisp morning air. The land stretched out like something ancient and wide and unconcerned with broken hearts. The wind lifted the edge of her dress and still she didn't move. Luther was nowhere in sight. The 3 women slowly converged around the table, each holding a silence as if it might crack under too much pressure. The rings sat between them, plain but carved with a curious tenderness. No names, no embellishments, just smooth wood and the hint of care. "He whittled those," Mary said softly. "In the dark." "Symbolic nonsense," Ellen replied, though her fingers hovered near one. "What's it supposed to mean?" "Maybe it doesn't mean anything," Joe muttered. "Maybe he just had nothing better to do." But none of them pushed the rings away. The door creaked. Luther entered with his sleeves rolled, carrying 2 buckets of water from the creek and a fresh basket of eggs slung over one arm. His boots were wet with morning dew, his beard bristled with cold. He nodded to each of them in turn, eyes steady. "Breakfast smells better than it did yesterday," he said. "Thank you." Ellen narrowed her eyes. "You trying to sweet-talk me?" No, ma'am. I ain't foolish. Joe watched him. Why do all this? Feed us. Give us shelter. Make us rings like your... Her voice trailed off. He set the basket down gently, then turned toward them. I buried a woman once, he said. Was my wife. Not thin, not quiet. Town didn't like her. Called her loud, called her large, said I'd picked wrong. But she baked like a dream and sang songs that made my dog cry. None of the women spoke. They buried her cold. No music. No preacher. No one but me. Since then I build things. Fences, chairs. Even coffins when the need comes. But I never built a table for more than one. Until now. Mary's eyes shone. We remind you of her? No, he said. You remind me what she was owed. Joe looked down at her hands. Rough from work, cut from wood. No man had ever called her worthy of more than muscle. She didn't trust the warmth curling in her chest. Ellen crossed her arms. You saying we can stay? Just like that. You want a signed contract? Luther asked. I've got a branding iron. Could burn my name into the wall. Mary giggled. Ellen huffed but smiled. Joe's mouth quirked ever so slightly. They ate together. After breakfast, Luther handed Joe a hammer. Barn doors loose, he said. Looks like you know tools better than I do. Joe blinked. No man had ever said that to her, without condescension. Ellen took over the kitchen, reorganizing shelves and cleaning knives with military precision. She whistled tunelessly. No one told her to hush. Mary found herself in the garden, sleeves rolled, bare fingers brushing the soil. She pulled weeds slowly, reverently, as if remembering something long forgotten. The day stretched lazy and sun-drenched. Around midday a rider approached. Not fast. Not cautious. Just purposeful. Luther walked out with a slight limp, one hand resting loosely at his belt, not near a weapon but ready. The women watched from the porch. The rider was tall, sunburned, with a crooked smile and eyes too sharp for kindness. You Luther Morrow? He asked. I am. Name's Clay Dalton. I'm here for the woman I brought out west. Mary. She's my betrothed. Mary's spine stiffened. You abandoned her, Luther said flatly. Clay shrugged. Didn't take kindly to being lied to. She never lied. You read her letters? I read her eyes. Clay spat in the dirt. Ain't your concern. She's mine. I paid for the train. Paid the matchmaker. She's not property, Luther said, stepping forward. Clay raised his brows. You gonna fight me over a woman that don't belong to you? Joe stepped down from the porch. Ellen joined her, arms crossed, chin high. Mary's voice broke the silence. Quiet. Clear. You can leave, Clay. His head turned slowly. What? You left me in the sun. With no food. No care. You don't get to decide now. You don't get to have me. He stared. Then laughed. You got soft, Mary? Fat and soft and... The slap came from Joe. Quick. Sure. Clay stumbled. Ellen leaned in. Say one more word and I'll get you with your own belt buckle. Luther didn't move. Didn't need to. Clay wiped his mouth, glared at them all, then turned and mounted his horse. You'll regret this, he muttered. Already did, Joe replied. When I agreed to come west. They watched him vanish into the dust. Inside the cabin no one spoke for a while. Then Luther cleared his throat. He won't be the last. I can't promise I'll always be here first. But I can teach you to shoot. If you like. Joe nodded once. Yes. Mary looked at her hands. I never fired a gun. No better time to learn. Ellen smirked. Hell. Let's make a sport of it. By sundown they were all behind the barn with rifles and bottles balanced on fence posts. The first shots were wild, scattered. Then Joe adjusted her stance, fired, and a bottle shattered. Mary shrieked with laughter. Ellen nailed 2 in a row. Luther just watched, arms crossed, the corners of his mouth twitching. Later, around the fire, Mary leaned close to Ellen. Do you think he's lonely? Who, Luther? Mary nodded. Ellen watched him across the flames. He was staring into the dark as if remembering things no one else could see. Yeah, she said. But I think he's been lonely so long he forgot what full feels like. Mary curled closer to the flames. Maybe we remind him. Maybe. In the quiet that followed, Joe stood and walked to the porch. She took one of the wooden rings and slipped it on. It didn't fit perfectly. It didn't shine. But it felt like something real. Inside, Luther placed another log on the fire. He said nothing. Just watched the glow dance across their faces. 3 women. 3 chances. And maybe, just maybe, a 4th ring still to carve. The smell of pie drifted through the cabin long before sunrise. Ellen was already elbow-deep in flour, lips pursed in concentration, sleeves rolled high. She didn't like silence, not when her mind started wandering back to broken promises and cruel laughter. So she baked spiced apples, cinnamon, and whatever calm could be found in the rhythm of the rolling pin. Mary sat by the window, braiding yarn into a new curtain tie. She hummed to herself, a soft lullaby she barely remembered learning, eyes flitting to the rising light across the river. Her voice had grown steadier these past weeks, the tremble replaced by something firmer, though still tender. Joe was outside with Luther, chopping wood behind the barn. The sound of the axe striking logs came like a heartbeat, steady, sharp, unyielding. Luther gave her space, only speaking when necessary. But every time Joe wiped sweat from her brow, he handed her a fresh cloth. Every time she paused to breathe, he nodded in approval, not as a teacher, but as an equal. The cabin was finding a rhythm. Meals, chores, even laughter. Until the hoofbeats shattered it. Fast, heavy, urgent. Joe straightened. Ellen peeked through the curtain. Mary pressed a hand to her chest. Two men rode hard up the path. Their coats were too clean, their boots too polished. The third, riding behind, looked familiar, his sloped posture, that mean tilt to his mouth. It was Clay Dalton again. But now he wasn't alone. Luther stepped off the porch and reached for his rifle without ceremony. The first man dismounted with a smirk. "Name's Sheriff Riggs. I hear you're harboring women who belong to other men." "They don't belong to anyone," Luther replied. Clay spat. "They were bought fair. Letters, passage, courtships. Ain't my fault they hid their conditions." "They're not livestock," Luther said, stepping forward. Riggs raised a brow. "Law says they're property if the contracts are signed. You interfering?" Joe moved beside Luther, her stance solid. "You're here to drag us back?" The sheriff's gaze flicked over her. "You speak pretty brave for a woman out of place." "She's not out of place," Luther said. "You are." Inside the cabin, Ellen had slipped a blade up her sleeve. Mary was trembling but reaching for Joe's old rifle propped in the corner. Her fingers shook as she loaded it, slow but determined. Outside, Clay puffed his chest. "I want what's mine." "No," Ellen said from the doorway, eyes sharp. "You want someone to hurt." The sheriff cocked his gun. "Let's make this simple. Hand him over. Or we'll take the whole damn cabin down." Luther's voice was a whisper of thunder. "You're not taking anyone." Then came the crack. Mary's rifle fired first. The bullet missed but shattered the wheel of Clay's wagon. Wood splintered. Horses neighed, rearing. Joe grabbed Luther's second rifle and took aim. Ellen stepped outside with the kitchen knife, yelling like a banshee, waving her apron as a distraction. Luther fired once, clean. The sheriff's gun flew from his hand as he yelped, clutching his wrist. Clay scrambled for cover behind a water trough, but not before Ellen threw the pie, hot, sticky, scalding, which splattered across his face and neck. He screamed and fell backwards. The chaos lasted less than a minute. The men, disarmed and humiliated, now knelt with hands raised. Luther stood above them, jaw tight, shoulders still. Joe pressed her rifle to the sheriff's chest. "You'll leave this land. You'll never come back. Not for us. Not for anyone." He swallowed hard. "We got law on our side." Ellen leaned in. "Well, we got pie." The tension broke like a fever. The sheriff nodded, face pale. Clay whimpered, burns rising across his cheek. They mounted up, less proud now, and rode off without a single look back. Luther turned, breathing slow. Mary was still by the doorway, rifle in hand, shaking. "You shot first," Joe said softly. Mary nodded, eyes wide. "I was scared." "You were brave." Ellen walked up beside them, brushing flour from her skirt. "And you ruined my pie." Luther laughed, the sound low and warm. They spent the rest of the day quiet but close. No one mentioned the broken wheel, the splinters still buried in the dirt. Luther fixed the porch rail. Joe sharpened the axes. Ellen baked again, humming off-key. Mary repotted herbs by the windowsill, her hands steady now. That night they ate together by firelight. No tension. Just a slow blooming sense of something whole. Luther stood after dinner and pulled a folded cloth from a drawer. Inside were 3 leather-bound pouches. He handed one to each woman. Joe opened hers and found a key. Ellen's held a folded deed. Mary's revealed a stitched handkerchief with initials carefully embroidered. MEFJB. "I registered the cabin in all our names," Luther said quietly. "A man can't give back what was taken from you. But he can build something with you if you'll let him." Joe's voice cracked. "You don't want to keep this place for yourself?" "I had a life once," Luther said. Now, I'd rather build something that doesn't need me to hold it together. Something that lasts because of you." Mary looked at her initials and smiled. Ellen leaned back. "You proposing to 3 women at once?" He looked to the fire. "I'm offering peace. If that grows into something else, that's your choice." Joe stepped forward. "And if it doesn't grow into love? I'll still build chairs for each of you," he said. "Still keep a fire warm." The room was quiet a moment. Then Ellen said, "If we say yes, hypothetically, who gets the first kiss?" Mary turned red. Joe rolled her eyes. Luther raised a brow. "You can draw straws." They laughed. And though nothing was spoken clearly, nothing had to be. Outside, the wind curled soft around the chimney. Inside, 3 women sat at a shared table, holding more than deeds and keys. They held a choice. And for the first time in their lives, it was theirs. The river thawed in early spring, breaking through the ice with the soft violence of renewal. Along its banks, wildflowers took root, defiant little things in blue and yellow. Wind moved gentler now, the kind that tousled hair instead of stealing breath. And on the porch of a cabin nestled between pine and prairie, 3 women stood in dresses not made for weddings, but for work and comfort, stitched by their own hands. Mary wore soft green. The color of new leaves, of patience, of second chances. She held a tiny pot of violets, their petals shaking with the breeze. Her smile was quiet, shaped by weeks of planting, mending, tending, and choosing herself again each morning. Ellen leaned against the porch post, dressed in golden cotton, bright as buttered sunlight. Her hair was pinned back with wild abandon, and her apron still bore smudges of flour and ash. She had laughed more in the past week than in the last 5 years combined. Joe stood in deep maroon, sleeves rolled, boots laced tight. Her hair was braided down her back like a war banner. Her arms, once only used for building fences or lifting hay, had found other uses: comfort, protection, affection. She hadn't spoken of leaving once in 3 months. They were not the same women who had been left under a wedding arch. They had outgrown it. Luther stepped onto the porch in a freshly washed shirt, buttons done with care but no tie, no fuss. He carried no bouquet, no ring box. Just a plank of maple carved into 3 perfect curves. Circles for each of them, polished smooth with beeswax and patience. "Hope this isn't too plain," he said. Ellen crossed her arms. "You make me cry, I'm shoving pie in your face." Joe took the rings, weighing them in her palm. "They're perfect." Mary's fingers brushed Luther's. "You built these slow." "I had to be sure," he said. "Didn't want to get the shape wrong." The preacher was already there, an old friend of Luther's, called in from a far-off village. He was short, round, and looked confused the entire time. "This ain't usual," he muttered more than once, flipping through his small Bible with a frown. Ellen handed him a cup of cider. "Neither are we." The ceremony was short. No vows read aloud. No crowd. Just a string of words spoken in gentle voices. Each woman took a ring. Each woman kissed Luther on the cheek in her own way at her own pace. There was no drama, no music. Only the wind and the birds and the 3 goats bleating in protest from behind the barn. Afterward, they ate together at the long table inside. A pie was sliced. Jars of pickled vegetables opened. A roast turned slowly over the fire. It was not extravagant, but it was sacred in its simplicity. Later, Joe walked to the edge of the creek with Luther. She didn't speak, just handed him a smooth stone she'd kept hidden in her boot. "Picked it up the day you stopped Clay from taking us," she said. "Meant to throw it at his head. But I kept it." He ran his thumb across it. "Seems a shame to waste a good stone on a fool." Joe's grin was sharp and warm. "Thought it might fit into the foundation. When we build the new wing." He blinked. "New wing. Gonna need one. Ellen says we're opening a pie shop. Mary's teaching the neighbor girls letters. I want a forge. A forge. I'm tired of waiting for other men to build what I need." He nodded once. "Then we build." Back inside, Mary was sorting through old letters. Some from family, most from strangers. She held each one, then tossed them into the fire. One by one, the words that once told her she was too soft, too big, too gentle, turned to ash. Ellen wrote a sign to hang above the front door. The cabin with 3 rings. Beneath it, she painted a crude image of a pie tin with crossed rifles underneath. "You think people will understand it?" Mary asked. Ellen shrugged. "Let them guess. We earned mystery." They did not live quietly. They lived loudly. Not with noise, but with certainty. When a neighbor complained about 3 women sharing a home with 1 man, Joe built him a fence overnight and never charged. When someone asked if they were all married, Ellen said, "Depends how bad your imagination is." When Mary delivered a neighbor's baby alone during a flood, no one asked her about propriety again. Luther watched it all unfold with a reverence few men carried. He didn't lead them. He walked beside them. He slept near the fire most nights, never taking more than was freely given. And in return, he received more than any man had a right to hope for: companionship, laughter, the gentle touch of fingers in his hair as he fell asleep, the occasional burnt pie crust he pretended was delicious. One evening, months later, a rider came again. This time it was a young girl. Her dress was torn, shoes missing, lips cracked from thirst. She didn't speak, just stared at the house, tears clinging to her lashes. Mary took her inside. Ellen fed her. Joe stood guard on the porch. Luther didn't ask questions. That night, as the girl slept near the hearth, he carved another ring. When Ellen saw it, she said, "You planning on making one for every lost soul that shows up here?" He smiled. "If I must." She rolled her eyes. "You'll run out of wood. Then I'll plant trees." Later, as the fire burned low, the four of them sat close together. Mary's hand rested on Joe's. Ellen's head tilted toward Luther's shoulder. The wind pressed against the cabin walls like an old friend returning. Luther spoke not to them but to the air. "I used to think love was one thing. One woman. One road. I was wrong. Love's a whole damn landscape. And sometimes if you're lucky you don't walk it alone." Joe nodded. "We're not walking anymore. We're building." Mary smiled. "Together." Ellen raised her cup. "To the cabin with 3 rings, and whatever else we damn well feel like adding." Outside, the moonlight pooled on the grass. Inside, the fire warmed more than just skin. And somewhere beyond the edge of town, the echo of rejection faded into something softer. Something slower. Something strong. Because sometimes the best endings are the ones no one else believed in. The train moaned over rusted tracks, screeching through wind-beaten plains as it hurtled west. Inside one of the middle cars, a girl sat still as bone. Her gloves were white cotton, slightly too large, and trembled faintly where they clutched the letter on her lap. Outside, the sky burned gold, and dust whispered like secrets across the windows. But Ada Bell didn't look up. She stared at the envelope like it might vanish if she blinked. The letter bore creases now, its edges softened by months of clutching, folding, and unfolding. Horace Grady, it read at the bottom in neat, stern strokes. He had written of his land in Dry Creek, his strong hands, and his need for a quiet, respectful wife. "I do not care for frills or nonsense. Just a woman with a steady heart who doesn't mind hard work. If you're willing, the train west awaits you." He hadn't seen her picture. She hadn't sent one. Ada Bell had burned when she was 9. A lantern kicked over in the barn during a spring storm. The fire took the left side of her face, part of her shoulder, and left her skin warped in patches down to her collarbone. In the years since, she'd taken to gloves, wide-brimmed bonnets, and the art of silence. People stared less if you kept your eyes down and voice soft. But at 20, with her father dead, her stepmother remarried, and no one left to take her in, silence alone wasn't enough to build a future. So she answered an ad. And boarded a train. Her reflection flickered in the window, distorted by the glass and glare. A smooth right cheek and soft blue eye, framed in soft honey-blonde curls. That was the side folks called sweet. The left, well, the left had no such name. She tugged her bonnet lower and watched her future creep toward her in blurs of desert scrub and weathered telegraph poles. The conductor's call jolted her. Dry Creek. Next stop, Dry Creek. Her breath caught. Ada folded the letter, placed it in the pocket of her worn coat, and stood, shaky on legs stiff from hours of travel. She collected her satchel, a simple brown thing containing 3 dresses, her Bible, and a pair of worn boots. That was all she owned now. When she stepped down onto the station platform, the heat slapped her face like a dry hand. Wind kicked up dust devils between horse carts. The station was small, just a wooden platform, a post office, and a crooked bench. Behind her, the train hissed and wheezed as if relieved to let her go. Eyes found her fast. A shopkeeper paused mid-sweep. A boy with freckles stopped chewing his jerky. An old woman squinted behind a hand fan. Ada kept her gaze forward, back straight, and searched for the man who'd written her. And then she saw him. Horace Grady stood beside a mule cart, arms folded, eyes narrow under a wide-brimmed black hat. He was taller than she expected, square-jawed and clean-shaven, with skin tanned from the sun and boots that hadn't seen a day of dirt. He watched her come, but the moment his eyes reached her left cheek, his jaw twitched. Ada reached him and forced a smile. "Mr. Grady? I'm Ada Bell." He didn't speak right away. Then he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, You didn't mention the scars. Ada froze. Her mouth parted. I didn't think it was important. He snorted. Not important? You think a man wants to look at that over breakfast every day? He turned, shaking his head. Hell no. This ain't what I wrote for. The murmur spread fast. A giggle from a teenager. A whispered poor thing from someone behind her. Ada stood still as stone. Horace climbed into his cart. Go back east, girl. Or find someone who don't mind broken things. I ain't that man. Then he rode away. And just like that, she was alone. The train gave a long whistle, warning it was about to depart. She stood between two choices: stay in this hot, empty town or board again with no money, no destination, and no welcome waiting anywhere. Her hand moved slowly to her coat pocket where the letter still rested. Her thumb rubbed the ink of his signature. She turned toward the train. Miss, a voice said behind her, low and gentle. You dropped your letter. Ada spun, startled, eyes wide. A man stood a few feet away, holding the paper she hadn't realized she'd dropped. He looked to be in his 30s, tall but with a slight bend in his left leg as if it pained him to stand straight. He had a face like warm cedar wood, sunburned, lined at the corners and steady in the eyes. His clothes were simple. Dust clung to his sleeves and his hat had been patched more than once. But there was a softness about him, something still and kind. She took the letter from his hand slowly. Thank you. He didn't look away from her face, not even the left side. Didn't blink or wince. I saw what happened, he said. You all right? I'll manage, Ada murmured, voice low. You've got grit, he said, nodding once. Not many folks could stand straight after something like that, let alone do it with dignity. She blinked. I didn't catch your name. Thomas Hale, he said. I've got a small ranch just past the ridge, 3 Crows. Was in town for supplies. He paused, looked down at her bag. Where you headed now? Ada hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. East, maybe. You ain't got a ticket, he said. And conductors already closed the car doors. Sure enough, the train let out a final shriek, and the wheels began to grind into motion. Her last lifeline rolled away with clanging steel, trailing a ribbon of smoke across the gold sky. She exhaled. I ain't offering anything improper, Thomas added gently. But I got an extra room on the ranch. If you need a place to rest just for the night, you're welcome to it. You don't know me, Ada said carefully. No, he agreed. But I reckon I know what it means to be left behind. And I reckon you could use a meal and a roof while you figure things out. She looked around. The town was small, its buildings like sun-bleached bones. Every eye still watched her, most pretending not to. There was no one she could afford. No family here. No welcome. And the man in front of her had eyes that didn't flinch. I'll come with you, she said, voice steadying. Just for the night. He nodded as if he expected no more. They walked together through town, his limp slow but sure, her silence deepening. Her skirts brushed against prairie dust and her gloves tightened against her palms. As they passed the mercantile, the boy who had giggled earlier muttered, Guess she found the one man too busted to care. Thomas stopped, turned. The boy shrank under his stare. That girl has more backbone than you've got sense, Thomas said, calm but cold. Maybe your mama oughta patch your tongue next time you run it. The boy bolted, red-faced. Ada looked over. You didn't have to do that. He smiled faintly. I didn't do it for you. She smiled back, just a twitch at the corners of her mouth. They continued toward the waiting hills. And as the sun dropped lower behind them, turning the sky into fire, a wind picked up across the prairie, cool and whispering. It tangled through the tall grass and hummed low, like the land itself was holding its breath. Ada Bell did not know what waited for her on that ranch. But she knew this. A man who didn't look away had offered her shelter. And for the first time in years, that felt like the beginning of something worth staying for. 3 Crows Ranch wasn't much to look at from a distance. Just a lean house pressed into the edge of a bluff. With a broken fence line and a corral that sagged like it was tired of holding anything in. The wind was louder out here, unfiltered by walls or town clutter. It howled across the open grass, whispering low secrets through the brittle weeds that reached up along the path. Ada sat beside Thomas in the wagon, clutching her satchel with both hands. The wooden wheels groaned on the uneven trail, and dust kicked high in their wake, painting their shadows long behind them. Every now and then Thomas stole a glance at her, like he wanted to say something and didn't know how. He finally spoke when the house came into clearer view. I meant to fix that gate last winter, he said, nodding toward a lopsided wooden frame that hung crooked at the entrance to the property. But snow came early and I didn't bother. Ada followed his gaze. The gate was indeed broken. One hinge barely holding on, the top rail split. You could have said it was decorative, she murmured dry. Thomas chuckled. Might have if I was clever enough. But honesty's quicker than charm, and I don't have time to waste on either. She didn't smile, but her grip on the satchel loosened slightly. They passed through the gate. The ranch house stood alone, weathered but sturdy. A porch ran along the front with two old rocking chairs, one missing a slat. A red dog barked once and then went quiet, tail wagging as it jogged alongside the wagon. That's Elmer, Thomas said. He don't bite unless you ask real nice. The dog sniffed at Ada's boots as she stepped down, then followed her to the porch, his ears perked. Inside, the house was sparse. Plain wood floors, a cast-iron stove, a small table with mismatched chairs, and a corner shelf with exactly 3 books. A quilt hung on one wall, hand-stitched and faded. There was no sign of a woman's touch. Thomas showed her to a narrow room off the back. The bed was small, the window cracked slightly for air. A water basin sat on a stool and a single chair stood near the door. I know it's not much, he said, but it's clean. You've got your privacy. It's more than I expected, Ada replied, stepping inside. She turned to face him. Thank you. He nodded, then paused in the doorway. If you need anything, well, holler. I'll be out early fixing fence lines, but I'll leave the coffee hot. With that, he left her alone. Ada woke the next morning to birdsong and sun bleeding through the thin curtains. She'd slept deeper than she had in weeks. For a moment she lay still, unsure where she was. Then the scent of coffee and fresh earth drifted in, and it all came back. Dry Creek, Horace, the rejection, and the man who hadn't looked away. She washed quickly, brushed her hair into a tidy knot, and stepped into the main room. The red dog thumped his tail lazily on the floorboards. Thomas wasn't inside, but a note sat beside a mug of coffee, gone to mend east fence. If Elmer bites, he's joking. Outside, the land stretched out like a canvas painted in gold and brown. She spotted him a good 100 yards off, bent over a fence post, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Rather than sit idle, Ada took a broom to the porch, swept out the dust, then hauled water from the pump to clean the front steps. The work was simple and familiar, and it helped her settle. By midday she'd fixed the back door's creaking hinge and washed the linens in the basin. When Thomas returned just past noon, sweat streaked his brow and his shirt clung to his back. He paused when he saw the porch. You didn't have to do all that. I wanted to, she said simply. They sat on the porch steps and shared bread, jerky, and quiet. The silence between them was not the awkward kind. It held space, like a waiting room for words not yet ready to arrive. After a time, Thomas set down his cup. Most folks in town don't take kindly to different, he said. They see a scar or a limp or even someone who reads too much, and they make up the rest in their heads. Ada turned her face slightly, letting the late light fall on her left cheek. The skin there was puckered, a patchwork of pink and pale ridges. What do they make up about you? She asked. That I talk to animals more than I talk to people. That I drink too little or too much depending on the day. That I'm still mourning something I should have buried a long time ago. And is it true? He didn't flinch. Some of it. My wife died 3 winters back. Fever took her fast. I tried going to town after, tried to talk like I used to, but every word felt like dragging a horse through mud. It was easier to be quiet. Ada studied him. His hands were rough, his knuckles scarred. A man who worked, not one who posed. I know what it is, she said at last, to be looked at like a story someone else already wrote. He nodded, his gaze on the prairie. Later that evening, a knock came at the door. A short, broad man in a leather vest stood on the porch, a scowl stretched across his wind-chapped face. Thomas, he said without preamble. Sheriff's got words. What about? Horace Grady. Claims that girl's trespassing. Says she was promised to him, and when he turned her away, she started trouble. Wants her gone. Thomas stepped out slowly, standing between the man and the doorway. She's no trouble. She's got a room here and she's welcome to it. The man squinted. That's not what the town's saying. Thomas's jaw flexed. I'm not the town. The man gave a grunt and turned to leave. Just letting you know, Tom. You keep her, you might not like the weight of it later. Thomas shut the door with more force than necessary. Am I causing trouble? Ada asked softly. You haven't done a damn thing wrong, he said. Then more gently, but this place, it don't take much for folks to get itchy. That night the air turned cooler. Ada stood out on the porch after dinner, Elmer at her feet. The moon rose like a silver bruise, casting long shadows across the land. Thomas joined her after a while, his limp heavier in the evening light. He carried a blanket, which he handed her without a word. "I never meant to stay," she said after a while. "I came because there was nothing left where I was. But I didn't plan this." He leaned on the porch rail. "Neither did I." She looked at him, the man with the quiet voice, the broken gate, and the house that hadn't seen laughter in too long. "Maybe broken things still work," she said quietly. "Just need someone willing to fix the hinge." Thomas turned his face toward her. In the moonlight, her scars looked like marble veins, beautiful in their own way. "I'd say you're doing just fine swinging open." And that, simple, understated, made her heart ache a little. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called. And beside her, a man who didn't look away stood with her like she belonged. The wind changed on the third morning, cooler, sharper, with the scent of pine and storm rolling down from the northern ridges. Ada Bell felt it before the sun rose, standing by the corral as dawn smeared the horizon in copper light. The land stretched wide, but something about the stillness didn't sit right. Thomas had left early again, off to mend a pasture fence, but before riding out he'd said something that lingered in her mind: "People don't hate what they see. They hate what makes them feel small." Ada thought about that as she fed Elmer and swept the porch again. The broom moved like it had memory, like her hands were working through more than dust. The sound of it scraping wood was the only rhythm that calmed her lately. Until she saw the nail. It glinted on the barn wall, sunlight catching the edge of a square head. There was something folded beneath it. She walked over slowly, heart thudding like it already knew. She tugged the paper loose. 4 words scrawled in thick black ink. "Leave or we burn." Her breath caught. She turned it over, nothing on the back. No name. No mark. Just a message soaked in the kind of silence that preceded violence. She stood frozen for a moment. Then turned toward the pasture. Thomas returned by noon, dirt caking his boots, sweat darkening his collar. The moment he saw her face, he dropped the reins. "What happened?" She handed him the note. His jaw worked. "Where was it?" "Barn wall." He said nothing for a long while. Just stood there, holding the paper like it might catch flame in his hand. Finally he spoke. "They think fear drives people off faster than truth." "Are they right?" she asked. He looked at her, then really looked. Her face, her scarred cheek, her clenched jaw. The way she stood, like the wind itself couldn't move her. "No," he said. "Not this time." That night they sat at the kitchen table, oil lamp burning low. A box rested between them, small, wooden, with a rusty iron latch. "I haven't opened this since before my wife passed," he said, lifting the lid. Inside lay a revolver, clean but worn. Beneath it, a box of bullets. He held it out to her. "I can't shoot," she said softly. "You ever learn?" "No one ever tried." He placed the gun on the table. "Then we'll try now." Out behind the barn, beneath stars brighter than city lanterns, Thomas set up 4 tin cans on a fence post. He showed her how to hold the revolver, how to breathe, when to squeeze and not to flinch. She missed the first 2. Hit the third. And the fourth? The fourth she shot straight off the post. He laughed once. "Well, damn." She smiled, really smiled, and the night air felt lighter for it. But lightness didn't last. 2 nights later they woke to smoke. The barn. Flames clawed at the roof, licking through the slats like a beast with a hunger. The horses screamed. Elmer barked until he coughed. Thomas was already out the door, water bucket in hand, shouting for her to stay back. Ada didn't. She ran toward the shed, grabbed a second bucket and plunged it into the trough. Together they threw water, shouted, dragged blankets to smother sparks. The fire fought hard, but they fought harder. By the time the last ember died, half the roof had caved. The air was thick with smoke and ash. The animals, spooked but safe, stood in the corner, wide-eyed and snorting. Thomas coughed hard, hand braced on his knee. "Someone said it." "No doubt," Ada replied, voice rasping. "They wanted to prove they meant their words." She turned to him. "We can't wait for them to try again." His silence said he knew she was right. That morning Thomas cleaned the shotgun. Ada rode into town. She walked through Dry Creek like she had armor on, head high, gloves off, bonnet trailing behind her like a banner. People stared. A few crossed streets. One man tipped his hat but didn't meet her eyes. At the mercantile she bought nails, a hammer, flour, and lamp oil. "Planning to build a war?" the clerk asked dryly. "Planning to survive one," she answered. On the way out she passed the saloon. Horace Grady sat on the porch, boots up, hat down, whiskey in hand. He looked up. Saw her. "Ain't you got the shame to leave town yet?" he called out. She didn't stop. He laughed. You think that cripple can protect you? You think scars make you special? She turned, walked right up to him, looked him in the eye. No, she said, but they make me honest. He didn't laugh then. That night, Thomas reinforced the gate. Ada patrolled the porch with the revolver in her belt. The wind carried no smoke, no footsteps, just prairie silence. But in the stillness, a bond settled between them, something unspoken but solid, like a stone foundation beneath shifting ground. Later, as they sat on the porch watching lightning flicker on the horizon, Thomas asked, "You scared? Of fire?" "Yes." "Of leaving?" She shook her head. "I've left before. I'm more afraid of never being seen." He reached over slowly, took her hand. "You're seen, Ada Bell." They sat there until dawn. When morning came, the sun found her standing alone, revolver in one hand, hammer in the other, fixing the broken gate herself. Each nail she drove into it echoed with defiance. She didn't look over her shoulder once. And far off in the distance, where the grass met the sky, a rider sat watching from the ridge. Waiting. The next chapter had already begun to gallop toward them. The prairie was still when it came, too still. The wind had vanished by late afternoon, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed against skin like a warning. Clouds gathered high and slow, stacking like judgment in the west. Thomas sat on the porch, cleaning the rifle for the third time that day, watching the road. He didn't speak, didn't shift, just kept one eye on the horizon. Ada was in the barn brushing the horses when she felt it, a tension in the air like metal drawn to a magnet. Elmer barked twice, then whimpered and retreated beneath the porch. That was all the confirmation she needed. "They're coming," she said aloud, voice calm. She walked to the house, wiped her hands and removed the apron she wore. Her revolver rested on the table. She buckled it around her waist without ceremony. Thomas looked up when she stepped out. "You sure you want to be out here?" he asked. "I'm sure I won't be hiding inside." He nodded, the tiniest curl of a smile touching his lips. "Good." They didn't wait long. 4 riders crested the ridge at dusk, Horace in front, the other 3 flanking him like shadows. Dust curled in spirals behind their horses. They didn't charge. Not yet. They took their time, letting their presence settle like a noose tightening. Thomas stood from the rocking chair, rifle in hand, and walked down the steps. Ada followed, her boots kicking up the dust he left behind. They stopped just short of the gate she had mended only days before. Horace drew his horse up. The beast snorted and tossed its head. "Well," he called out, "ain't this cozy?" Thomas kept the rifle low but ready. "Turn around, Horace." "No, see, that don't work for me. You've been shelterin' what ain't yours. And folks are starting to think you're a fool for it." He turned his gaze to Ada. "You were told to leave. Thought I was being merciful. But now you're digging your claws into something that don't belong to you." She stepped forward. "Nothing about this place ever belonged to you. Not the land. Not the man. And sure as hell not me." One of the riders to Horace's right snorted. "Feisty little scarecrow." Ada didn't flinch. Her fingers hovered near her holster but didn't draw. "Not yet." Thomas's voice was cool. "You ride any closer and I'll shoot the first man who touches that gate." Horace looked amused. "You think you can shoot all of us before we take her?" "No," Thomas said. "But I know she'll shoot the rest." The laughter died. One of the men shifted in his saddle. Ada's voice cut through the growing dark. "You want to test that theory? Go ahead." Horace didn't move. His jaw flexed. Something shifted in his eyes, not uncertainty but discomfort. She saw it then. He hadn't come expecting a fight. He came expecting fear. A woman to cry. A man to back down. Instead he saw steel. He saw a scarred face and a man with a limp who didn't tremble. And he didn't like it. "Last chance," Thomas said. "Turn around." Horace glanced at his men. One gave a slight nod. Another less sure. "You've got a sickness here," Horace said. "And it's spreadin'. You protect the broken long enough, people forget what whole looks like." Ada stepped forward until she stood in front of the gate, her boots on the edge of the line. She said, "If this is what broken looks like, then you ought to be terrified of what comes next." Then it happened fast. Horace flicked his hand. The rider on the left drew his pistol. A single shot rang out, sharp, clean, final. The man dropped before his weapon cleared the holster. Ada stood still, arm raised, smoke curling from her revolver. The others froze. Elmer barked once from under the porch, low and wild. Thomas raised his rifle. Next one tries something gets buried beside him. The prairie was deathly silent. Horace stared at the body. The dust hadn't even settled around him. He looked back at Ada. She didn't waver. Her face was calm, resolute, the wind tugging her hair loose behind her bonnet. The scarred cheek caught the dying sunlight and gleamed like polished copper. Horace swallowed. "You don't win anything by standing behind a fence." "No," she replied. "But I've already won by not running." He shifted in the saddle again, eyes scanning the house, the horizon, the other two riders. No one moved. Then, grudging, snarling, he spat to the side, yanked his reins and turned. "Let's go," he barked. They rode off without another word. The dust swallowed them like ghosts. When it was done, Ada slowly lowered her arm. Thomas let out a breath like he'd been holding it the whole time. "You all right?" he asked. "I am now," she said. He smiled. "Remind me never to argue with you." She laughed once, sharp and sudden, like something alive had come loose in her chest. That night, they buried the man in silence out past the ridge, beneath a tree line brushed with moonlight. No name, no stone, just earth turned and packed. Afterward they stood together under the stars. Thomas turned to her. "You saved me tonight." "No," she said, "you gave me something worth defending." Weeks passed. The town quieted. Whispers faded. Horace didn't return. People looked at her differently, some still stared but some nodded. One little girl passed her a flower outside the church one morning. Ada thanked her, and the child smiled like it was nothing strange. In time they made repairs. The barn got a new roof. The porch a new swing. The broken gate stayed crooked though, by choice. "I like it better this way," she said. "It's honest." One bright spring day they stood on the hill behind the ranch. Thomas held her hand. They didn't speak. They just watched the wind roll through the tall grass below, painting waves in gold and green. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I spent years trying to disappear," she said. "Now I think I'd rather be seen. Even if they look twice." He pulled her close, kissed her temple. "Then stay," he whispered. "Stay and build something that makes him look again." She smiled. "All right." Months later, when the preacher came with dust on his boots and a leather-bound Bible, they married beneath the twisted cottonwood outback. No guests. No fanfare. Just a man and a woman who saw each other clear. And when he said her name, Ada Bell Hale, she said it back to herself later that night, alone on the porch. Ada Bell Hale. The prairie had a way of giving names back to those who'd lost them. Not just what they were called, but what they meant. Out here, under open sky and unbroken stars, she was no longer the girl with the scar. She was the woman who stayed. The one who stood. The one who drew first.